The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So there is more to yesterday's statewide elections than merely what I discussed on the broadcast show today. Two men have been charged with distributing phony sample ballots in Marion, Ohio. We're talking, by the way, of Republicans, lest anyone be confused. Marion County Republican Party official John Matthews and official Robert Landon, who was the candidate for Marion City Auditor, distributed campaign handouts that looked like sample ballots, according to a report from ABC News. This is a charge of imitating the Board of Elections, which could get you 6 months in jail and possibly a $1,000 fine. Definitely one of those examples, Pat, where the fine and the jail time seem out of sync. I would obviously, given the option of spending 6 months in jail or paying $1,000, I would every single time choose to pay $1,000, but maybe there's something I'm missing about that. I don't know.
Yeah, because even if you're short on money, I think that you'd be able to make that $1,000 in 6 months at pretty much any job, and then you don't have to live in jail while you're doing it. So I would definitely take that deal too.
And of course, this is banned by Ohio law. Ohio law says if you're a political party or a candidate, you can't hand out sample ballots. They're supposed to be printed on colored paper to distinguish them from real ballots. These were printed on white paper, and they were in many ways indistinguishable from the actual ballots. And this is not the first time that Matthews has done this. And 2 years ago, in 2017, he pleaded guilty to theft in office for doing political work while he was supposed to be doing claims support work. And it is once again criminality involved in political work. And he started being investigated back in 2016, given a year of probation, had to pay $4,000 by the Franklin County Common Pleas Court. And this is, listen, Pat, I mean, there's a bunch of stories here. One is that it's the Republicans who are constantly complaining about election integrity in ways that it's not really a problem, except in examples where they are the ones doing it. That's one story. The other story is we only hear about the instances where people get caught. And I assume that if you look at all of the races that are happening at this level, I mean, this is an auditor's position. There are lots of these positions around the U.S. There's probably way more of this happening than we know.
That may be the case, but it just seems to be like a strange thing to go down for. Like you're making these sample ballots that are supposed to confuse people,
yes,
and you're willing to put yourself at risk, meaning maybe have to go to jail over it or pay a fine over it. So that's the only thing that leads me to believe that maybe it's not so popular. But you're right about the other point. That's for sure. That whenever we hear about these like election fraud issues, it typically tends to be the Republican who's the perpetrator of it. And for whatever reason, whenever a story like this comes out, Democrats and the media don't really pay attention to it.
Well, as you're pointing out, it seems like a stupid way to try to really trick people for your benefit. But that applies to a lot of this stuff. I mean, these are not really the best ways in many cases to try to win elections. It is a good way to, at a big picture level, suppress the vote, right? By doing banning same-day voter registration, purging people from voter rolls in large numbers. Like there are games you can play that really can be very pernicious ways of swinging an election. Most of this stuff just seems kind of dumb. And I guess it's like we never said they were criminal geniuses, Pat. We just said that they were criminals. And we need to consider that just because they have some idea doesn't mean that it's actually going to help them win. And in that sense, it's actually good. I mean, I would rather, if we assume some people are getting away with this stuff, which I'm sure they are, I'm sure not everybody who does stuff like this is getting caught. I would rather it be them getting away with things that are not really good ways to swing an election.
Yeah, and I think when you see something like this, it's easy to get complacent too, because you think, well, how many votes is this really changing? Are people really confused by this? Do they think that they're actually voting when they fill out those sample ballots, or do the sample ballots, favoring Republicans, does that help sway an election? Most people would maybe think not so much, not really.
Yes.
But a lot of these elections only come down to maybe a few dozen votes. Maybe there's only a few thousand people voting in these elections, so it can be the difference maker. And we saw yesterday in the Kentucky governor's race, what was it, only like a few hundred votes decided that election?
I think it was like 4,500, but I mean, it's still not a crazy amount. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Percentage-wise, it was like 0.4%. So that's really the important thing. Very slim margins. And obviously, the slimmer the margin, the closer an election is or is expected to be, the more possibility that any stupid technique has to maybe swing the election in your favor. We'll see ultimately what this is now a habitual offender. We'll see what the punishment ends up being, if any. Hey, here's an interesting entrepreneurial story. There's a 21-year-old named Jason Gonzalez who figured out that there was an area in Minnesota that wanted donuts, but did not have ready access to a Krispy Kreme location. And what Jason Gonzalez did was drive a long way to pick up donuts and then drive back and sell them to locals in this particular part of Minnesota. And now it is turning into a bigger sort of story because after Krispy Kreme found out that this was going on, they decided that they are now going to actually be working with him to provide larger amounts of donuts so that he can run this business at a bigger level. And I have such mixed feelings about this, Pat, because on the one hand, I love the entrepreneurial component. I love the idea of, figuring out where there is unmet demand and all of this different stuff. On the other hand, these are not exactly what one would call healthy foods. I don't know that I love the idea of this being the snack that he is bringing back and forth, but maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's just about, it's a 21-year-old who clearly is, I hate to use the Republican term because it's stupid, pulling himself up by his bootstraps. I'm kidding. But maybe we should just applaud the entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly entrepreneurial spirit, but is he really being all that much of an entrepreneur? Like he's selling products that aren't his. Certainly, like he's going out of his way to make the long drive, and I understand like that's where the value is in what he's doing.
Yeah.
But don't you have to get permission from the business? Like it seems like he's just selling someone else's product without cutting them in and trying to turn a profit for himself.
That's
and
exactly
he can't
right.
get away with that.
I mean, it's also a story of the little guy is not going to win because initially Krispy Kreme said you can't do this. You are an unauthorized. You're not authorized to do this. And then they told him you've got to shut down operations. There was such a social media blowback from all of the people who love getting their Krispy Kreme donuts from Jason Gonzalez that Krispy Kreme says that they instead are going to help him achieve his goals and help him get set up to sell Krispy Kreme donuts to get debt-free when he graduates by 2021. I don't know. I mean, it's like one of these stories where it's not exact. You know how we've talked about those stories, the heartwarming stories of Jimmy's class in third grade helped him raise money for his cancer treatment with bake sales. How heartwarming. No, it's a dystopian nightmare because 9-year-olds or third graders or whoever shouldn't have to help their classmate raise money to pay for cancer treatment. This isn't exactly like that, but like, is this positive? Is it dystopian? Is it something in between?
Maybe something in between. I don't even know. Like Krispy Kreme, I think if it not for being such a big story on social media and like so many people from Minnesota demanding these donuts, they probably would have just sent him a cease and desist letter instead of offering to pay for his schooling or making sure that he graduates debt free or like setting him up with some way to do this. So I guess Krispy Kreme is probably handling this as good as they can. They claim that they don't want him doing this because they're worried about that 4-hour drive and how that could lessen the quality of the donuts.
Oh, yeah.
And if that's true, I think that would be the first time that Krispy Kreme was concerned with the quality of their donuts.
Yeah, I've never known them to be concerned with the quality of the donuts. I'm completely off donuts. I don't know about you, Pat, with one exception. I do admit that when I go out to Western Massachusetts, I will occasionally go to Atkins Farms and get their world famous cider donuts. That is something I admit to doing.
Donuts are typically made with eggs and dairy, so I would have to get a specialty vegan donut, but I don't think I've had one in quite some time. So yeah, I'm pretty much off the donuts as well.
Yeah, I don't know if a vegan donut really works as a donut in the sense that isn't there something about the egg component that makes it what it is? Well,
you can always find another emulsifier. There are certainly egg replacers out there. You can do that.
Sure.
And what is your take on donut holes? Because I'm always concerned. I'm always like really wondering about that term because if you think about the donut hole, a hole is an absence of something, and when you have just that tiny sphere of donut, that's not really an absence. It's not really the hole anymore. So I've never really understood that terminology.
Well, I am not only against it because it is geometrically flawed, but I also find donut holes to be racist and anti-Semitic. So I'm completely against them for that reason. Yeah. Okay, that's a joke, by the way. Please, no angry emails about that. It's obviously not anti-Semitic. It is racist, but not anti-Semitic. Here's something interesting. We've been hearing more and more about tests done with 4-day work weeks, and workers at Microsoft Japan over the summer were given 4-day work weeks as a test. And the company claims productivity went up 40%. because the company became more efficient in many areas, including lower electricity costs, which were down 23%, printing fewer pages because workers were not working on Fridays. And a lot of this doesn't really make that much sense to me, I have to admit, Pat, because I've read a lot about the possible benefits of shortening the work week and cramming more. But isn't there some correct, like when I hear that fewer pages are being printed because they're not working Friday, if what you're doing is actually integral to your job, wouldn't you just print the pages on a different day? Like either work's not getting done because they're not there on Fridays, or a lot of the stuff that's normally done on Fridays isn't actually key to the running of the business, because some of these numbers don't really make sense to me.
Right, yeah, they're saying performance is up because they're saving the electricity bill and they're saving the paper cost, right, on Fridays. But
yes,
wouldn't that make sense then if you cut out Thursdays as well, that you'd also save on paper and electricity? At a certain point, your productivity is going to go down, though.
Close the office, you'll save rent, you'll save electricity. Like at some point, it doesn't make sense. But the ones that do make more sense are the company cut standard meeting time, used to be 60 minutes. They cut it to 30. And that was adopted for nearly half of all meetings. And the number of people attending a meeting was capped at 5, where only the key people for that meeting actually go. That's great stuff. And I've read a lot about that. And that should just be done, period, right? I mean, don't have meetings for longer than they're supposed to be. It's a very common thing in companies to schedule meetings for longer than they actually really need to be. And once you've done that, everybody feels sort of obligated to fill the time, even though it's not necessary. A lot of this stuff is really great. And I think there's a lot of very interesting scholarship around the 4-day work week. Some elements of this seem like they are maybe not really getting at the core of what makes the 4-day work week interesting.
Yeah, and it's not entirely people just being lazy and wanting to work less, too. I think it's people who want to have a better work-life balance and they don't want to be totally burnt out when they're at work, and working less overall contributes to that.
Sure.
And they asked in a survey, if your pay stays the same, how many days a week would you like to work? And 0 was an option, but only 4% of workers chose 0. It seems like people do actually want to work. 34%, which was a plurality, said that they wanted a 4-day work week. 5-day work week got 28% support, and a 3-day work week got 20% support. So it seems like maybe the 4-day work week is the way to go from a productivity standpoint, from a worker happiness standpoint. It's probably the best idea, I think.
This may be something at some point the David Pakman Show can implement. I mean, there are some logistical complexities because we produce a weekday show. We do produce 5 shows, and there is a Friday show, although our bonus show audience probably knows that a lot of that Friday show work is not done on Friday. It's done a little bit earlier. So it's not inconceivable that if we really put our heads together, you could, I mean, listen, Letterman did it. Letterman produced 2 shows on Thursday and he worked 4 days a week. And next thing you know, he was having all sorts of affairs in some kind of sketchy back room at his theater. So it didn't go all well, but we can't blame that necessarily on the 4-day work week. So it may be something for us to explore.
I didn't even know that. I got to look into David Letterman's history, I guess, I suppose. But, to your credit, I suppose that the Fridays here at the David Pakman Show aren't all that intense. I mean, at least us, people on my level here at the company, we maybe work for like a few hours, but not as long as we do during the other days of the week.
That's right. Yeah. At the C-suite level, like our CEO, our COO, our CTO, our accounting team, our legal team, they all have very, very busy Fridays. That's mostly just me. But in any case, anyway, I'll keep everybody posted about whether that's something that we explore. Pat taking very detailed notes over there. Okay, that does it for today. We will have a new show and a new bonus show coming up for you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.